Oh sure, let me just load my tap into every security camera in New York app. I'm sorry if that sounded like sarcasm, it wasn't, I am in.
Every kid with autism.
Ron Corsillo, a writer for Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, mentioned twice on his Twitter that Donnie came across as somewhere on the autistic spectrum to him, basically more or less confirming that he's autistic. Or at the very least, he's written to intentionally come across as autistic, which is basically the same thing. It's never stated canonically within the show itself, and while I have one more nitpicky gripes with that, autism representation in Western animation is so scarce that I honestly can't bring myself to care. Unlike the Owl House in Growing Up Neurodivergent, where I explain that their neurodivergence directly ties into the story thematically, Rise just happens to have an autistic character who is represented very well, which is in my opinion just as important to depicting the autistic experience. It's a character who is popularly believed to be autistic coded before the confirmation, so clearly an example of what good representation looks like. Now, here's my obligatory spoiler warning for not only Rise of the TMNT series, but also for the movie. Most people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, so you should do that. That's what you should do. Here's how Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles successfully wrote the autistic character Donatello. Alright, so, Donnie's canonically autistic. That doesn't really mean anything standalone. What would this analysis be without actually taking the time to point out some of the times Donnie exhibits symptoms of autism, which, by the way, is literally every single scene. Like, genuinely, it is obvious in every scene, and that's how it should be. Let me list out all the symptoms and traits, or at least the ones I could find. He has a relatively flat voice most of the time and also has comparatively odd vocal inflections. He's very blunt and literal while speaking. He also takes things literally.
That's gonna be hard. This was the last paper store in town.
Or was it?
Yeah, I literally just said that.
He often talks in grammatically correct sentences or with a different vocabulary than the people around him. In photos, he seems to generally dislike being touched unless he's the one initiating it. He seems to have worse motor skills compared to his brothers and uses his tech to make up for it. This is much more obvious when he was younger, as shown by the Lair games. His sensory issues are alluded to and shown multiple times throughout the series.
Now then, what is for brekkie today? Burrito! Tempting, but my culinary needs are more refined. One flavorless juice, Sheldon?
I think the most obvious of his sensory issues is this entire scene from the movie. As someone with sensory issues, apocalypse be damned, I'd rather die a horrendous death to the Krang than touch whatever the fuck that is. He stims. I think the two that really pushes forward is the Lair games, where he is happy, like doing the happy flap thing, which I do, and then also rocking back and forth while being upset. And I don't know how to explain it, but his little quirk of saying scoff and other descriptions in place of making the noise comes across as autistic to me. He gets easily frustrated, which could be a sign of emotional dysregulation. He can get hyper-focused on things. He can be resistant to change, as demonstrated with his refusal to use mystic powers over his own inventions. He tends to organize written out rules like the code system in the movie and his inventions handbooks, which he will most likely be the only one to read. The most obvious trait that I think he has is his special interest in his tech and inventions. Something I really appreciate about his character is he isn't just narrowed down to just his special interest. Unlike many other autistic characters in Chapter from Zero, when an autistic character's existence is limited to their special interest, they are shown to only be a useful member in the cast because of their materialistic contributions, while their actual personality and other autistic traits they exhibit are seen as a setback and annoying. In Donnie's case, he never has to change his autistic traits in order to work better with the story. He isn't ostracized by his family or by the writers to be tucked neatly into this little box of perception that alienates him from other characters. He's completely free to be himself and is entirely accepted for who he is. Despite his differences, he is equal to the other characters and integrated into the story with the same treatment. The show isn't very emotionally driven, as it is more comedic in nature, but it's made obvious that he's more than just his tech. And last, he exhibits many symptoms of alexithymia, more commonly referred to as low empathy, which is a lack of emotional awareness and difficulty describing feelings. Having alexithymia is very common amongst autistic individuals, with multiple studies determining that almost half of all autistic people have it. The symptoms consist of a limited ability to articulate feelings, issues identifying emotions from both themselves and others, having a thinking pattern that relies more on logic and leaves little room for emotions, and difficulty responding to the emotions of others. Low empathy is one of the most stigmatized stigmatized aspects of autism. While autism is a spectrum and not every autistic person has low empathy, the stigma has affected every single autistic person negatively by being portrayed as an integrally wrong trait to have. At a quick glance, Donnie is what people would usually label as bad representation. He's the genius tech whiz who's sarcastic, blunt, and has low empathy. This is a very common stereotype for autistic characters that usually does more harm than good, but I don't think that's the case for Donnie. See, stereotypes are examples of bad representation most of the time, not because of the stereotype itself, but because of how it is written. They tend to be less of an accurate representation and more of a caricature of accumulated traits that become associated with a particular demographic, whether or not said traits are factually correct. Each example of a stereotype has its own nuance and exceptions, but stereotypes about disabilities and mental disorders tend to dehumanize, demonize, villainize, and/or infantilize a character. Autistic stereotypes aren't written for a character who happens to be autistic. They're written as someone with autism whose life is either so terrible because of their autism, or they're a bad person because of their autism. Either way, the narrative is that autism is bad, and this usually caters to the eugenics mindset of treating it as a disease that needs a cure. For a point of reference, the most famous character stereotyping low empathy is Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. Characters that fit this caricature of autism are such terrible representation generally because they're assholes. Specifically, their low empathy makes them an asshole. I cannot stress that point enough. Their low empathy is what makes them an asshole. The stories are, whether intentionally or not, writing these characters to be so aloof and dry in emotional situations for the audience to laugh at them or to antagonize them. Slapping the label of autistic onto characters like this alleviates the malice in those actions, supposedly. In some cases, they even make them out to be completely emotionless, as if they are incapable of experiencing anything that could possibly connect them to the world. Because as we all know, autistic people are just incapable of experiencing emotions. Right. And in cases like Entrapta from She-Ra, these traits are given to them to do the opposite of demonizing them, to instead infantilize them. Even though she is literally in her 30s, so why the fuck was she put on a leash in this scene like an unruly toddler? This stereotype of low empathy autistics is done in the same manner that an unstable character would be given some kind of identity disorder in order to justify their actions, or so that the audience understands how someone could end up like that. It perpetuates the idea that a normal person could never act like this, pushing the belief that someone who is mentally ill, disabled, or autistic isn't normal and that there's obviously something wrong with them. Them being emotionless is easier to understand for autistic people if they're explained to be different and weird, which is obviously a bullshit ableist take that stigmatizes autism. That's not a good message to send out there to the world at all. And yeah, Donnie sometimes completely misreads the tone of a situation. Occasionally he may come across as rude, but he's not heartless. In Donnie vs. Witches, he opens up to his moment of arrogance due to his aloof and stubborn nature and apologizes for it. Because again, he's not emotionless. He just has trouble articulating and displaying his emotions. There's a distinct difference. And the most important part, his conflict in this episode isn't even that he's too emotionless to realize he's being a jerk. It's that he's lashing out due to an insecurity he has about his place on the team and his worth as a friend. His emotional distance results in him doing this in an unhealthy and destructive manner, which he again realizes and apologizes for. He's not emotionless. He doesn't think he's better than others for not feeling emotions. He's insecure about not understanding something. You can even take his hindrance in incorporating and accepting mystic powers into his life as an allegory for a rift in communication with others. Mystic power is, from my understanding, kind of powered by emotions, in a way. So Donnie would find it easier to stick with the logical explanation that science can offer him over however that works, which is a very real and understandable struggle for him to have.
As a man of science, it is maddening to finally come upon something you do not understand. Especially when your dum-dum brothers totally do and then wave their dum-dum weapons in their dum-dum hands all the dum-dum time.
I rarely talk about this because of how stigmatized it is, but I have low empathy. The best way I can describe what it's like is there was a time when my friend was talking to me about how one of her pets that died, and even though I have literally gone through a pet I grew up with dying, I didn't really feel anything when she said that, and I certainly didn't feel for her. Instead, I understood the logistics of sympathy. Her pet died, that's sad. I also had the awareness to be compassionate compassionate enough to not be a complete dick about it. I'm sure whatever I ended up saying to her was along the lines of Zuko's classic,
That's rough, buddy.
which to someone who doesn't know me well will probably take as rude, but she knew me well enough to know that that was me being genuine. My point being, me having low empathy and a general lack of awareness of not only others' feelings, but having a difficulty distinguishing my own, doesn't make me a bad person. I'm still capable of caring about people. I do care about people. That is what many writers get wrong. Low empathy doesn't mean you're unable to be compassionate, nor does it mean you're incapable of sympathy, nor does it mean you cannot care for or love another person. Autism itself doesn't make you hard to get along with, rude, hard to tolerate, difficult to communicate with, or emotionless. Donnie is emotionally distant. He doesn't do heart-to-hearts on a regular basis, and he doesn't show that he cares about his brothers April or Splinter in the same way that others do. He doesn't engage with them in the same mannerisms they do unless he's going out of his way to do so. But never for a second does the show let you think that he doesn't care about his family, because he does care about them. He keeps them in mind when inventing things that include them. He makes escape pods for all of them on the off chance that they'll need them in battle, despite only ever using them once. He makes a tree house when they're in the woods with Todd and shares it with them, and so much more. Another really nice thing I would like to point out is his family genuinely seems to understand and accept the way he interacts with them, and they know that he cares about them as well. All of them do something that I have personally only had a few people in my life do. They properly meet Donnie in the middle when it comes to communication. He doesn't have to bend over backwards in order to mask his autism, so it's easier for them to acknowledge his needs. Rather, they clearly have taken the time to understand his different way of communicating and expect it during their interactions. Ironically, the mutant turtle is more humanized than actual human autistic characters. Because, yeah, okay. This kind of representation is very nice to see for a demographic who are regularly taught to fix themselves in order to appease a majority. It sure is a refreshing narrative to watch while you're like me and expecting to see things you can't control about yourself being depicted as if it's something wrong or that needs to be corrected, or yet another reminder that people will never take the time to understand you. Donnie's character thrives off of his sarcastic charm. He livens up the dynamic between the characters whenever he's involved without his autism being the butt of the joke. He's never treated as if he's too different from his family to be understood, although that doesn't save him from a few lighthearted jabs from his brothers because, well, that's just how siblings are. Donnie has low empathy, but this doesn't inherently make him a bad person. He doesn't need to fix this about himself to be a good person and come across as one to others. However, it does mean that he communicates a little differently, but that's okay. Autistic people don't need to change themselves in order to connect with the world around them. If only autistic people could set aside the stigma and see that too.
Because I'm the science guy. If mystic powers can do everything I can do, but better, then why would you guys even need me?
Donnie, how could you say that? You aren't important to me because of your tech. You're important to me because of you. I don't think mystic powers is better than science. If anything, they're stronger together, just like us, right?
Right. In that spirit, might I suggest a science mystic team up?
Subscribe, please. Anyways, thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out. Bye.